This is Pam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air tonight with Gabriella Milgrom for the first time. Welcome to the Pam Electric Ghost podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
I want to let people know that we are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. You can see that icon up there listed on Newsly. We'll be on Newsly later tonight. If you use coupon code GHOST, you get 1 month free premium subscription to that podcast. If you use that coupon code, again, we're a featured podcast on that platform. And this is going to be episode 922 of the Pam Electric Ghost podcast. We've been on the air since 2016 on Apple Podcast. So that's where we're tracking that. And then this episode, we're going to focus on a successful design project isn't about the vision, it's about the strategy. Mm-hmm. And then we'll go back to your two URLs. So we've got both of them that we had. And people, those will be clickable when people get the final podcast that's out there on Facebook or YouTube or any other platform. But we have your GabriellaMilgrom.co website. So if people go to that website, can they book a consulting session or consultation with you there?
Yes.
Great. So we like to give people that and let them know, for those who are listening, that that's their www.GabriellAMilgrom.co. So you've been an accredited interior designer and professional project manager. You've been in the industry over 12 years, managing like multi-million-dollar residential projects and commercial spaces and hospitals. And you teach people, specifically women, how to create their dream home. And maybe you can talk about what that means from your perspective. What is a dream home to people? I guess everybody has their own concept. How do you facilitate that with people?
Yes. So the vision of what a dream home will differ per person, but everyone has an idea in terms of wanting their home to feel a certain way. And normally it's an emotional reaction. You want it to be warm. You want it to be inviting. You're looking for your home to be an embodiment and an outward expression of yourself, a place where your family can come back to. It's that kind of antithesis of everything that you've ever built for in your life and you've created, is that symbolism of a home. So really what that ends up looking like is different per person. But my goal is really to be able to give specifically women, because we tend to be more in the dark when it comes to these specific strategies, but the tools and the tactics that they need in order to more effectively create their dream homes in a way that is going to work for them individually, rather than thinking that it needs to be a certain thing that might not actually work for them in the long run.
Now, when you do these design projects, because of like what's gone on with the pandemic, are a lot of the dream homes you deal with now actually have integrated home business offices and facilities? So, because I would think, like what I do, in my own home, it's a home I bought. I didn't build it, but it was brand new, and I kind of made it so I could have a bedroom studio. So I have a bedroom studio that I built, but I would think if I could have built it from scratch, I would have certain things built so it would facilitate that better than it is right now.
Oh yeah, if you've been building it, or if you were looking to remodel, I'm sure you'd put in acoustic panels and all those things so that it's got a higher sound acoustic rating. But yes, so with the pandemic, and even prior to, but the pandemic definitely increased the surgence of it, would be the rise in people needing spaces within their homes that are multifunctional, either that they can pull out an office space and utilize as it's needed if they don't always work from home, or that transition where they always work from home and they need to convert an existing space to be able to work for them.
Yeah, because I was wondering, because there's so many different levels. I mean, you can have people who are, doing like design work. They've got to have really high-speed internet. They might need to have, the infrastructure set up almost like it's like a business. So it's almost like you're integrating some business level capabilities with a home.
Definitely.
And so is that what you run into with when you get these big projects with people, like the multi-million-dollar type of residential projects?
Well, I mean, to clarify, so I have two streams of my business. So I've got my design studio, which is Gingy Design Group, where I will execute the projects for you. We'll sit down. You'll engage me as your interior designer and project manager, and I run through all of these questions, and I go through the entire design process, and I create that design plan, that compilation of materials, resources, lighting, everything that brings that entire idea together. And then I help you manage the execution and manage the contractors so that it's built how it needs to be built and exactly how you want it. That's one facet of my business. The other facet, which is the GabriellaMilgrom.co, is me teaching you how to do it. So it's giving you my 12 plus years of design and management experience, boots on the ground, construction management, project management, interior design skills and experience in your home, as well as one-on-one with me, where I will teach you how to go through the process more effectively, so you're not left in a situation where your space doesn't work for you, or you had to cut a whole bunch of options out because you ended up being way over budget because no one taught you how to create a budget. Or you didn't know that you needed all these different aspects to a project and you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off because you had no idea that all these things needed to be figured out and these things needed to be found and your lead times are too long, and how do you manage all these different components? That's what I teach you.
Yeah, because it seems like you have to have like zoning for certain things, and do you have the right piece of land to do what you want to do? Could it support what you want to do? And then what do you you have to really think like the whole holistic approach of like everything, not from this to design. Like, are you in the right place to do what you want to do? Is it actually going to have access to the capabilities that you need, and then the budgeting for like all the things that you want to have? So it seems like if you're somebody that's like, well, I don't know if I could handle that. You're saying that you could do the whole project, or you somebody who feels like, oh, I'm going to be like a Home Depot person. I'm going to try to do some of it, so they could do it yourself with consultation with you.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So if you're more someone who you start getting into a project and you realize that there's a whole other layer of complexity that you never even thought to, of either renovating, remodeling, or building a home, and you're like, I don't have the capability, I work full time, or this is something that's way over my head, I want to hire someone to do this for me and then bring me in where I'm needed to, that's one section where I can help out in. But if you're someone who's like, I want to do this myself, this is my home, I want to be able to create this space for myself, and you're going through the process and you're also realizing that there's a lot more to it than you thought, and you feel very overwhelmed and very stressed out by it, and you're realizing that that vision board or that Pinterest compilation of images isn't actually serving you, and it's leaving you more stressed out, more overwhelmed because you don't know what to do with it, that's where I come in. Because that's really where I find is that with the design gurus and the influencers that are out there, there's this predominant statement that you start with a vision board. Let's start with your mood board. Let's start with your vision board. What do you want the space to look like? And then there's this idea that you create this mind map of sorts of images, and then that becomes your Bible. And then that's going to be enough for you to be able to make all the decisions, to figure out everything that's going into your space. And the reality is that it's not. There's a lot of questions and a lot of strategy that needs to go in planning, that needs to go into it at the beginning, that then informs the design, and then the design informs the strategy, and it's kind of a back and forth process to really nail down all of that design features and to give you the answers to the questions that are going to come up as you go through the process.
That makes sense to me. I'm a software designer, so we have to start with what we call infrastructure, right? And that's not as sexy as like, okay, the actual idea, right?
Exactly.
That means like the database, the tech that we're going to use, the constraints that we have. So it's like we look at it, well, we're using Oracle or we're using blockchain, there's certain things that technology can do and they can't do. But if you just kind of have a pie in the sky and it's like, we don't think about what your infrastructure is. Is it going to be a steel frame? Is it going to be a wood frame? Is it going to be an A-frame? Is it going to be in a place that has good well water? Does it have connections to the utilities? Does it have high-speed internet? If you just want your space where you don't think about all the things that aren't probably like maybe in the back of your head because you're not an engineer or you're not an architect, but you didn't actually think out the things that will actually be the roadblock. That you can't do that because like you got bad soil quality. You can't support what you're trying to build.
Well, and that would be if you're building a home, right? But like I'm even talking about if someone is looking to, I don't know, say, redesigned their bedroom or their bathroom, for instance, the
Mhm.
ongoing thought process is like, I'm going to do this bathroom. I'm going to completely redo it, and I want it to look this way. So then you go down this visual tunnel, and you start looking at images on Pinterest and Instagram, and you're like, ooh, I like this for my bathroom, and I like this for my bathroom, and you're compiling them together, and you create this vision board of sorts, and you're like, this is what my dream bathroom is going to look like. And you think that document by itself, which is just
enough.
images, is enough to get you to the finish line. And it's like you mentioned with software design, strategy and the tactics behind it and the planning and all these questions that you need to be asking and figuring out beforehand that actually inform the design decisions, they're not sexy. No one really wants to do it, right? It's not like anyone wants to deep dive into a budget and figure out all those complexities.
Yeah.
But if you don't figure out and you don't really dive into those questions, which is like your priority list, and that really drives how a project is going to go about. Why? Because at any point in time in a project, things are going to happen on site that are going to differ from what you thought was going to happen. And if you don't have that priority list that says, these are the things that need to happen in this bathroom, for example, these are my wish list items, when stuff starts to go awry and you need to make all these decisions, you don't know what can be scrapped. You don't know what areas you can pull back from and do at a later date that are not going to totally blow up your entire project, cause a trickle down effect, or completely change the design in its entirety. That then when it's done, you look at the bathroom and you go, well, it's not really what I wanted, because you never really mapped it out from the beginning. You just found images and said, this is what I'm going to do. And then we're just rolling with it as you were executing the bathroom rather than planning it from the beginning.
Yeah, so it sounds like if I want to get like what's kind of, like I want a steam sauna in a bathroom that's got like, the latest tech with like, the audio systems integrated into the steam shower.
And the venting and the whole thing.
Like a big bathtub. It's got all this stuff, but it's way bigger than my current space. So then you have to like architecturally expand like the second floor of the house to support it.
And then even in the example of a steam shower, what type of extra infrastructure from venting do you need to put into that bathroom? And then what is that going to look like? That's going to take you talking to a mechanical trade in advance, asking, is this even feasible? Because they're going to have to attach to your existing line. They're going to have to vent outwards. What do they need to put into it? What additional HVAC systems do they need to support? How does that work and where is it going to go? And if you have this idea in your head and you start going through it before you've even mapped out feasibility as well as cost, you're going to get to a point too late in the project where you're like, oh crap, I can't actually do this.
Yeah, or could the floor even support the weight of what you're trying to put in?
Exactly.
Do you have to replumb, like do a lot of plumbing to get that to actually send the water at the level you want? Can you heat it at the level without getting a new water heater? Like, did you actually even think about doing that?
Yeah.
When you actually probably need a special, like, water heater to actually do what you're trying to do. And
or your pressure, right? Like, can the pressure that's coming into your house even support it? Yeah. And I mean, I don't, from a program perspective and the programs and offerings that I have, we don't go deep dive into like these individual specifics, but we go through the checklist and the foundations in terms of these questions that you need to be asking yourself that inform how the project is going to go about. And then all of those different portions that you need to be working through as you're executing the design, because again, they go hand in hand. Design itself is not this separate entity that just exists on its own, separate from planning. And that's what most people do, is they figure out, this is what I want to do in a space and I'm just going to run with it. And then they don't really plan it. They don't really figure out the numbers, and they're going. And they're picking things as they're going. So they're designing as they go. And that's how you end up with an incredibly inflated and way over budget project that you're either pulling back from too late, or you're like, oh my God, this bathroom cost me $20,000 when it was supposed to cost you $5,000, because you didn't figure it out. So it's about giving you the tools and the foundations that you need at the forefront to walk through a project in a systematic process. Again, not sexy, but it's what we as interior designers do. We just don't label it as such. It's a systematic process that we go through, and I'm giving you that to say, this is how you're going to go through it. These are the questions you need to ask. This is what we're going to work through. And all of that information informs the design that you're creating.
Yeah, because somebody wants a sunroom and they don't, they want to put something in their attic or they want to add it to a porch. Or if in my case, I would like to take my bedroom studio, either put it in the basement or add a room on the attic to have it in the attic. But then I started thinking about could I really lift all this like soundboards and stuff into the attic? Would it be easier to go through the bulkhead in the basement and put it in the basement? Just physically the weight of trying to put that stuff in, you start thinking like, well, yeah, it would look cool in the attic, but could you actually get things up to the attic in a reasonable way? So it seems like it's actually more doable in the basement.
Yes. Yeah. And feasibility is a big one. It's part of what I used to do in my career was feasibility of projects where it was like, hey, we're looking at this new site. Is this a tangible option that we're looking at? And of course, those were commercial spaces. So their metrics were very different in terms of what feasibility looked like, but it's the same concept. And I think where a lot of people get stuck on, which is where a lot of projects fail, is not understanding that in any project that you take on, especially the ones that you've been describing, like bathrooms with big saunas and, steam rooms and soundproofed attic spaces, is that there's a level of skin in the game, which are called your hard costs, that happens in a project before you even get to the point that you are going to hit go. And that's where you are talking to consultants, you're talking to experts, you're talking to contractors. Most of them, especially if there's a large of upfront pre-design phase that's coming about where they're looking at if it's even tangible, there's a fee associated with that. And then they're going to look at all of the different variables and structural load and all these different assets for what you might be looking at and say, okay, if you want to do this, this is everything that needs to get done. And then you can look at it and go, this project is way bigger than I thought it was going to be, and it's not really feasible. We're going to go in a different direction. But you still have costs associated with that exploration phase.
Yeah.
And if you don't go through that process either by yourself or with consultants and with experts, you're going to end up in a situation too far gone down the road where you thought it was something simple when really it wasn't.
Well, it seems like you got to invest in a good plan and a good strategy to know what's possible with your budget.
Like definitely.
If I come and said, well, I want to have an elevator that can bring like a residential elevator that can bring like Marshall amps to upstairs, so I don't have to bring them up the stairs. I actually want it to be built that way so I could do that.
Yeah.
So I could bring them up, and then if I have to go show a show, I can bring them down into the garage, and I don't have to bring them down the stairs. So that's something I really want to see. Is that possible? I've seen, in magazines that there's residential elevators. Could I actually put that into my structure and use that because I have a reason why? I want to have those amps in my studio, and I want to be able to take them on the road when I go to New York. So I want to be able to move them around.
Yes. And I mean, and anything like that where you're touching a massive amount of structure, I wouldn't advise doing it on yourself. I would say talk to an expert. Talk to an engineer, talk to an architect, because they need to figure out load calculations. And I mean, another thing that a lot of people don't consider, and depends where you live in terms of rurality, like if you live in a very rural area or more of a city, how strict those building codes are and municipal guidelines are, is that a lot of people have misconceptions of what is required for building permits. So there's this idea, it's like, I own my home, I can do whatever it is I want for it. And the fact of it is that that's not true. It's not. You could, but you're going to get slapped with a massive fine. Or if you try to sell your house with work that was done illegally, it is very difficult and actually mostly impossible, and can mean that you have to take it down in order to sell your property. So there's all these different factions to it. But in most cases, anything that is touching your structural load and is touching how your house works from a co-compliance and life safety. So like, are you touching anything that's load bearing? Are you adding anything that could cause harm to someone or changing how it works? That requires a building permit. And anytime you get into any portion that requires a building permit, you need professionals. You either need a draft person you need an architect, or you need an interior designer, you need someone who is going to be creating those drawings for you, that you are an engineer that can submit to get you approval for your building permit. It's not something that you can do on your own.
Yeah, it's like when I got Tesla to put the solar panels on the house, and they had to get permits to do all that stuff.
Exactly.
Because
Yeah.
it was touching the roof, it's touching all the electricity. It added boxes to the house,
Mhm.
added like all these things that have to get permitted. Just like if you put a gas furnace in, you got to get a permit because
Well,
like
yeah, and you also have to think the loads of them on the roof, right? Like, can
yeah,
your roof
they had to
work
check
with
them.
it?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
luckily they that's like a third party company. They do all the calcs, they check it. They run they ran a satellite picture of the house to see where the sun hits. They went and checked the structure to
Mhm.
see so they had to do internally and within the roof structure to be able to put it on. Luckily it was a brand new house, so it was kind of set to be able. It was more modern, so it was built in like 2008 versus something that's older that wasn't even thinking of that could ever happen. So it was not
No.
rather, some of our older houses are harder to retrofit. But
Oh, definitely. I live in
yeah,
one. I have a 1986 house. It's a wonder, but also a horror sometimes when you think of, can I make this change without large impact?
yeah, you got to do all this extra work to try to make it, to make it work.
Mhm.
So when you run into a situation where somebody has a plan to renovate a house, and it's so significant that you would say, well, this you might be better suited to actually doing a whole new house.
It depends. And in certain situations, I mean, I have a project that I'm working on with clients and from the Gingy Design Group side in Calgary, which is in Alberta in Canada. And they fell in love with the property. They fell in love with a portion of the structure of the house. But they pretty much tore down the entire upper level and have gutted out the entire space and are redesigning everything and reconfiguring pretty much the entire house to the new design plans. In that situation, would it have potentially have been more cost effective to have torn it down? Potentially, but there's factors that need to be considered when you look at that, because sometimes what happens with properties on existing property lines or lots is that they're grandfathered in terms of their property easements and where they're placed. So as
Oh,
soon
so
as
they're
you
kind of limited to
actually
that structure. They're
exactly.
limited to
That
the
structure
original.
in terms of where it sits, how big it is, its exact placement is grandfathered. And as soon as if you tore down the entire mass, you would be stuck with the new jurisdictions in terms of how big that volume and that structure could
Oh,
be. So there's different things that need to be considered. And that's where you really need someone who can go into your local municipality and read what their bylaws and their requirements are and what that new kind of code zoning is, because that can impact your decision whether or not it's more economical and cost effective to tear the entire house down, or if it makes more sense to keep a portion of the footprint and then build on top of it, because those are two different situations from a city's perspective in terms of what you can do with a piece of land.
also like thinking about like I do this podcast, virtually, but
Mhm.
if I invested in trying, making like a studio in my basement that had like a whole room in like an actual, you know, studio set up so it's isolated. So I had like a voice room. The question is like, based on it's a residential area, if it became more of a business, I probably can't do it and invite guests to actually come in there and run like a business. I might be better suited to actually find a place that's zoned and build a studio in a zoned area where it could be.
Yes, and that's where you really do need to check your zoning bylaws in terms of your residential neighborhoods. Some places allow businesses, some places don't. Some places allow businesses of different types to work from home. If it's you working from home, like for instance, I work in my own house. This is my design studio, but it's pretty much me, and then I have contract workers that work virtually. I don't have people that come into my office, and I don't execute work with multiple people in my office. Sometimes I'll have clients come in and we'll do a little chat, or like suppliers, but it's not like I'm running a business out of my home with multiple people coming in. If that was the case, it would not be allowed. But me as myself in my own personal business, that's fine. It all comes down to your personal zoning. And that's another thing that you would need to check with your local municipalities. Again,
Yeah, because
planning.
that's me. Yeah, because virtually, we can do this, and I've been doing it since 2016. But the dream is to eventually have it so it actually is like a real studio. And
Yes.
so then I've always thought when I build like a second house that's actually zoned to be a studio. It's kind of
And
like if you
I
ever
don't know,
watch,
you could probably do like a
you know,
laneway or something like that as a separate, like off building, separate from your house. You'd have to check it, but that's an option.
yeah, if it's zoned for commercial, but you might
Mhm.
want to have a separate place because you don't want people that close to your own personal space. Like if you're somebody that's doing a podcast, do you really want people to know exactly where your house is,
Well,
right?
these
So
are the
yeah,
questions.
so if you're into entertainment, like you might not necessarily want everybody knowing that that's your house, right?
Oh,
So it's
exactly, right?
yeah, so you might want to build it somewhere else. So they like I'm a musician too. So like I want to build a studio. It's not only for podcasts, but maybe a rock band wants to come and record.
And
So
yeah, and then
that
do you want a bunch of rock bands in your
yeah, you
backyard?
don't know. So you kind of put it somewhere that's zoned for that, and it's like that's not my personal space. That's my business of doing a studio. So that's where
Mhm.
that kind of comes in. Where yeah, you might have like a band in there, and you might even build a thing so it's kind of like a small studio. So you have a small studio audience and then televise it, right?
Mhm.
So you can send it around. So then you want to build something that's kind of like, I guess the guy from Hall and Oates, he built something like that. He built like a studio. We have bands came in, and they actually was a small studio audience, and he even had like a little bar. They ended up building out, and he runs it like he's like his own little studio that he runs a TV show out
Well, that's
of.
pretty cool.
So he's in Hall and Oates, and he actually built that, and it's like that's where he ended up having all these famous bands around the world come and do these like private shows at his own like house. And
Mhm.
basically they called it his house, but it's actually a separate studio from his house. So yeah, this seems like yeah. I mean, in the art world, there's all kinds of things that people would want maybe built in their own space, but they got to figure out can I actually have that where I am living, or I have to build it somewhere else.
Yes. And I mean that's really where the planning process comes in and that whole strategy thought process. And it really depends upon the project. If you're not looking at something as in depth as building your own studio, but you're looking at possibly a kitchen renovation, for instance, or a kitchen expansion, there's still a lot of planning that goes into it. I have someone that I'm helping on a consultant basis at this point, just hourly, and it's been a long process to facilitate this kitchen because a lot of the questions that should have been answered up front and gone through at the beginning in terms of what they were wanting to do, what their priorities were, how do they need the space to work for them, weren't answered. It was a let's get cabinets, let's move forward, and let's do this whole process. And then every project that you're working on, there are nuances and relationships that go together. And a lot of the time, what is misunderstood and is missed on projects is the relationships between decisions. So that's where the strategy and that planning comes in. Using in a kitchen example, for instance, your cabinets cannot be cemented and be landed on and put into building and fabrication until you have all of your appliances and your plumbing specifications figured out, because your
Yeah,
cabinets are built to suit those constraints. So you could be working with a kitchen fabricator for your cabinetry, but if you haven't picked all of your appliances and you haven't picked the sink, you haven't picked any of these different items, they can't finalize the design. So they'll
yeah,
give you the thought process of this is what your kitchen's going to look like. And then 3 months later, you come back with your specifications. What if your fridge can't fit where you wanted it to and you've already purchased this fridge now? Well, now they have to give you a different design iteration based upon the new specs that they have. So then it reworks this whole design thought process of how this is going to work. Where if you know what it is that you need to have coming into that planning process at the beginning, an idea of what your appliances are. What are you thinking for your sinks, your faucets, your hardware, the internal components that you want in a kitchen, like pull-out garbage cans and recycling, a built-in paper towel holder, these different items that you're wanting from an organization and internal system, you can have those conversations up front and be ready to move forward. So then your lead times in terms of from your cabinets being made to your purchase of your appliances and everything else happens much more systematically. So you're
yeah,
never in a process where you're like waiting 6 months for a fridge to arrive when everything else has been finished.
It seemed like if you wanted to do like a professional kitchen, and it's kind of more because you're a chef and you want to make it kind of like what your job is. But
Yes.
you want it to be like your home. So maybe you have a center aisle that has like a ducting system. Well, that probably doesn't exist in your house. It doesn't have the wiring to support or the plumbing to support that being in the center, because usually it's against the window and the wall, right? So then you would have to know what all those high end, stove, the refrigerator might be a bigger refrigerator than what is normal. You might be like, the washers and everything might be more industrial level quality because you're trying to cook, because you're cooking at home. You want to really do it like you do at
Chef
work.
grade appliances in there,
Yeah,
which
so you'd have to like
large or low capacities, right? So can your house support it?
Yeah, can support the electricity? Like thinking about a studio, can you support the electrical load of a real mixing board,
Yeah.
of a real board and the big amps? Can you actually support that power drain on your house with all the other things running in your house, or do you need to, actually beef up your electrical system to support what you're trying to do?
I ran into that problem in my house when I was looking at doing a kitchen renovation, and all I was adding was some outlets and some pot lights. But my house is from '86, and its panel is pretty much completely tapped out. And I was like, if you want to do this with all of the different loads from your specifications and your additional wiring, you're going to have to put in a sub panel.
Yeah.
Okay, now I have to factor that in, right? So it's like these are the things that you need to understand and that come through that whole planning process and those discussions that you're having. And to be clear, the planning process is not you sitting by yourself trying to figure out all of these things that you might not be aware of because it's not your field of expertise. It's understanding who you need to be having the conversations with and bringing into that project to ask you and go, okay, well, have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? What's going on over here, that then spur that thought process and become a part of that decision-making process that informs the design. So that's where we get a lot of pushback sometimes in the industry where people think, it's a kitchen, can't you design that in 2 months? In theory, but there's also a lot of planning that goes into it and a lot of different back and forth massaging, that a design timeline for any project is not as simple as like 2-3 weeks. Because there's all of that actual planning and those conversations that take place.
Yeah, it's like management by date is hard if you have, like when we have unknown variables. Like in software design, if we're building something that we never built before, we don't have a good benchmark of what it takes. Right. So you have to go and like say your structure, your infrastructure, you got to go and build whole new tables to support what you're doing. Well, they didn't exist. So they didn't exist. That's time you have to do to build that kind of structure. It's like putting the wires in, putting the pipes in. So if you need 5 more pipes and you don't have them, then you got to put that in, right? You got to put that box in because you don't have it. And so then that doesn't, it's like, oh, you could want it done in 2 weeks, but does it take 2 weeks to clear that with getting the license and getting the electrician? Are they available? Are the components available? Because nowadays, with like you could have I want it done in 2 months, but what you want is in short supply, and there's a backlog. You might not get it for months or a year. So you have to kind of have somebody like yourself. I think you know how to ask the question.
Yes.
So somebody has an idea, and you start to make them think in a more like project oriented way, so they can start to see like, oh, the stuff I want, like the timelines are going to mean I couldn't get this done for 3 years. So maybe I've got to compromise and go with something else.
So this is how I kind of view timelines. Either way, in any project you look at, and I don't know if you've experienced this in software design as well, the timeline is always going to be X amount of months. So let's say you wanted a kitchen done in 6 months and you're like, I'm going to do this kitchen. It's going to be 6 months. And you just demo right away and you're designing and you're building it as it goes. But as you're working through it, you get all these hiccups and you have to press pause constantly because you don't know what's going on over here. You've got delays happening with your appliances. You haven't ordered this, you haven't ordered that. And actually, from the time that you started the project to when you end up with a finished project is a year and 9 months later. that time frame was probably always going to be a year and 9 months. But the way that you started the project, where you just hit go right away off of a thought and started demolishing, you were living in a horrible situation of a half unusable kitchen or like cooking off of a campfire stove for a year and 9 months versus upfront planning and figuring out all of those different components and everything that had to be ordered, everything that had to be figured out, knowing when everything is coming together, looking at that time frame and going, okay, based upon this, this is when I'm going to demo my kitchen, and then everything will roll together systematically, and then I won't have a year and 9 months where I don't have a kitchen. The time frame was always going to be the time frame, but you started and you jumped the gun too early.
It's like phasing it. Like when you build a bridge, do you tear down the bridge that you're replacing, or do you kind of keep it there? As you know, maybe you bring it down to a couple lanes, but it's still there. So
exactly.
You phase it so that there's still like this redundancy where there's something there, maybe not exactly what you want, but you can still do it. Versus like you went and did it, got rid of everything, and you can't phase it. So you can't phase something at like 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and then you do the big. You wait to the last minute to the last phase of it, so there will be a shorter time where you don't have access to something.
Exactly. And when you upfront and you forecast it, it reduces a lot of that stress. Because if you're in a situation where you're living without a fully functional kitchen or like cooking off of a camp stove in the winter, that is a horrible stress and a horrible overwhelm. And you're freaking out and you're going, when is my stuff arriving? What's going on? And you're getting stressed out and agitated because it's not working how you need it to. And that is a heavy load that you're wearing. So then this is where, like, yes, it's not sexy and it's not fun. It's not as fun as creating the design and picking the finishes and creating this beautiful image of what your kitchen's going to look like. But the planning that you do beforehand and that future forecasting, so you can understand when everything's going to become available and how you need to phase that process, that's what's actually going to ensure a project success. And that's what's going to mean that when you hit go, maybe you're only down a kitchen for 6 weeks, because you can do a kitchen from like full demo to build out in 6 to 8 weeks, but everything has to be lined up.
Yeah, you probably need to know what appliances you're going to get and if they're available.
Like, yes, and have that date scheduled.
If everything you want you can get within that time frame, then yeah, you're going to be cool. But if like suddenly like I'm going to build a studio and I want a Neve board and it costs like $20,000 and there's only 5 of them built a year and they're all sold out.
Yeah. So then you're waiting.
Start that studio, and I'm like, well, I can't even put the board in because they're all sold out, and I can't get one until 2024 or 25. So how am I going to build it? Why would I build it? Because I can't even get it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I worked on a couple projects last year, which were commercial, that were building like quick service restaurants. We had a lot of delays in our RTU units last year, where we kept on getting promised different dates. And RTUs are your rooftop units, so your big, massive HVAC systems in commercial spaces. So we had massive delays where we were told, oh, it'll be 20 weeks. And then a couple weeks later, actually, it's sitting at like 28, 30 weeks. So the time frame kept getting pushed out, and we'd already hit go on these projects. So we ended up in a whole bunch of situations where we had to come up with these secondary pivoting options with like backup generators and different types of like secondary HVAC systems that were brought in from an air cooling perspective in order to wait for these RTUs to come in. Not a great option, but we'd already hit go based on this other information we were given that later on proved not to be correct. And that does happen in construction. I'm not coming here and saying that if you plan, everything will work out exactly how you want. It doesn't, but it usually gives you enough information to be able to make the more easily make the right decisions or more effective decisions when you are in a stressed out situation, because you've kind of already figured it out.
Yeah. I mean, because that's what's my daughter's been real interested in, because she's into horticulture and she does a lot of hydroponic gardening. So far she's done these hydroponic gardens in the kitchen, and she found mechanisms that work. And then she got so good at it, she said, well, we should take the deck and repurpose the deck and actually turn it into like a garden room. And we actually, in our housing development, they actually have this thing where you can have your deck turned into an extension of your house. And within our housing development, there's an approved design for that.
Mhm.
So we know that you could do it because we've seen people put them on and there's an approved design. So it's like, okay, we could do that, but we have some alterations to that design because it's actually for an indoor garden. So we
Mhm.
might want different windows or different type of roof. So there's an idea you can have it, but it might be altered in order to support a garden because most people aren't using it for that.
No,
So
probably not.
yeah, so then there's like we have a very strong idea about what we want to do, but we have to find the right people to actually, give us the roadmap. We know what's been done, and we could do something, kind of try to force our idea to fit, but
Mhm.
we kind of want it to work the way we want it to work. So then it is more customized. And that's where
Yeah.
I think that that is that what they kind of push and pull when you're showing somebody what there's like a thing you could do that maybe is cheaper, but it doesn't really fit. And the question is it 80% fit? Is it 70% fit? Is it 50%? Or is it 90?
Exactly. And I mean, like in your situation, you have it of the design that's already been pre-created. So at least you've got something that you're working with that then you can massage to be more specific to your needs. A lot of the time what ends up happening, and I've seen this with clients that I'm brought in the last minute to try to help save projects, is they literally just started with a compilation of images and gave
Mm.
it to the contractor that they hired when their trades and said, make this happen.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they hadn't sourced anything. They hadn't really figured out what they wanted. They didn't really know what their priority list was in their bathroom or their kitchen or whatever room it was. So all of these things started happening in the project and the cost just kept rising because they hadn't really figured out what they wanted in a project. And then it also ends up in a lot of disputes with the contractors because they're going, well, I installed the tile the way you wanted. And you're going, well, you didn't ask me, you didn't do this. Well, did you have those conversations with the contractor? Because someone's assumption off of an image is going to be very different than your assumption off of an image. So there's providing images to contractors and this idea that it is a roadmap. It's not enough. It is part of a package that you create, and it is part of a system, but it is not enough to stand on its own. And when we
You kind of
think
need
it's
a
enough to
blueprint,
stand on
right?
its
You need a
own, that's
real
where we get in
blueprint.
trouble.
So you need a real like blueprint or a more technical thing. Like in our world, like we build code, but we have code tech designs. So you could have an idea that's like a use case, like the business case, or has actors, has this, visual, and it's like it's very simple, but that's not what it's going to actually have to be because you get down to all the details. It's like, hey, what's the UI going to be? What those are details that the top level person, I don't care about that, but then they do because when they get it, well, it doesn't do what I wanted, but you didn't tell me that.
Yep.
Because like
Yep.
you didn't tell me that the CRM person needs this drop down with these radio buttons. You just said you wanted a CRM, right? But you got to tell me what use cases you want for the CRM. So it's
Yeah.
like the same type of thing. Like you need to tell me. And sometimes what they do is the unhappy path, like the 10% scenario, the 10% thing, that takes all the work. The 90% was my God, but it's like this thing that they didn't tell me about. That's their thing. That's like the 10% scenario, but that's like the hardest one. It doesn't take the normal path. It's like that's all the work that takes up all the budget, takes up all the time because they didn't tell you exactly what that was. They assumed that you kind of knew it, but you never actually voiced it.
What is that saying? Assuming makes an ass out of you and me. And I really feel that is a case in construction, especially just with the rise of people hiring contractors directly and being like, hey, just do this, or having conversations with them. So another piece that needs to be understood with hiring any contractor and these design packages that are just images is it's not enough for contractors to price on. So you can give them a bucket full of images and say, this is what I want my bathroom to look like. And they're going to go look at it and go, okay, so based upon these images, we're doing some tile, we're doing a new countertop, we're doing a new vanity, we're doing a new mirror. Okay, I kind of get the gist of what it is that they want in this bathroom. You haven't picked everything though. You haven't gone and picked those tiles. You haven't picked the countertop. You haven't picked the vanity. You haven't picked anything. And they're going to give you a price. And sometimes they break out their price. Most of the time they don't. They just give you a cost and they say, hey, this is what this cost is. That cost 99% of the time, if you have not given them any specs that you have sourced specifically and said, this is what I want, is based off of the common mean value of materials in construction. So if the average of a tile, that's a wall tile, is $1.15 a square foot, and they're looking at it and assuming that you only want wall tile in the shower, they're going to take those measurements, they're going to base it off $1.15 a square foot, and that's the cost that they're giving you, that they're including in their quote. And then as you move through this process with them, you go and you pick everything. And guess what? You fall in love with a tile that's not $1.15 a square foot. You fall in love with a tile later on down the road that's $4 a square foot. And not only do you not only want it in the shower, you want it on all the walls. Now you've increased your linear feet as well as increased the cost of the tile. Your budget is going to be way over from what it is that they've charged or what they've quoted you. And all of a sudden you're going, why is my contractor charging me this extra? Because you didn't actually give them anything to price off of. You gave them images. And it was based off of assumptions. So this is where like a vision is not enough for a project. You need to have the strategy and the tactics and the mechanisms in place to give an actual package to your trades and your contractors for pricing and execution. It'll save you a world of headache down the long run.
So is it always better to have like very defined like supplies or items, like, like I said, like I know I want a Neve board, I know it has these power requirements, I know my current power requirements are this, so I assume my electrician's going to have to do work there, I know what this cost, I know what the weight of it is, you give them the weight, you tell them, like, can this floor take that, you start to do the numbers. You actually have real things. You have a real thing that weighs this much, has this kind of power consumption, my current thing. So the more defined information you have in terms of what materials are, what they cost are, what the limitations are, what things that you need venting, you need cooling, you need this, you need that. You start to have more defined things rather than just the pictures. Even with them more defined, you still could have some cost overruns, right? Or you'll be less likely to, right?
You're less likely to. The more specific you can nail down exactly what it is that you want, and you've picked everything. So you've picked the floor tile, you've picked the wall tile, you've picked your bathtub, your shower components, the whole kit and caboodle, and you've said, this is everything that I want. And I'm going to be purchasing these items, but I need you to select and to purchase these items. Then both of you are on the same page, and then you know exactly from what he's quoting you and the conversations you've had that everything should in theory be checked off. Will there be additional costs as the project moves forward? Most of the time, especially if you're doing a remodel in an existing space, because there's always going to be things that come up once you start opening up walls that could never have been factored into. But that's where your contingency fund comes in. That should be a buffer in your budget. So that's another side conversation, is that a quote that a contractor gives you is not a budget. It's not your budget. It's a quote. There's a whole other things that you need to be adding to that number to be your budget. And I have an entire YouTube video on that. So go and watch that, because there's 7 things that you need to include in the budget so that it's robust and it includes everything. But so if you don't want to put in the legwork up front, and it's like I said, a timeline is typically a timeline. So it's either you put the legwork up front, or you put the legwork throughout and the project takes slightly longer. The difference will be in how your project is priced and the contract type that you move forward with. So the more information that you can provide a contractor and trades, the more accurate your pricing will be. So your contingency can come down, and you can proceed with a lump sum contract, which means that they know exactly what it is that you want from them. You guys have talked, you're on the exact same page, and you're getting a card quoted cost of this. For all of this that we've talked about, this is how much it's going to cost. Much more easy to budget for, much more easy to track, because you know exactly what's being accounted for and what's not. If you don't put the legwork in and you have things that you haven't sourced and you're going to do that as the project moves forward, your contract type that you move forward with your contractor for pricing cannot be lump sum, because they don't know what they're pricing for. So that's when you would do like a cost plus which is where you pay them for materials plus a percentage. You can do time and materials, which I really don't advise on because it'll just keep going up. There's the GDP. There's all of these different pricing models available, but every single one has its pros and its cons, and they're good for different types of projects, depending upon how much legwork you want to put in the beginning.
The question I have, like, if you're doing like a bathroom, right, and you want to put it like a Japanese toilet that has like electric power, right? Yeah, I lived in they these toilets from like Toto that have like fans in them and they're heated.
Oh,
But if your
yeah.
bathroom doesn't have the support for that, it doesn't have an outlet near the toilet at all. It doesn't have any. So you gotta have an electrician plus
Yep.
the plumber plus somebody that can do the carpentry. So it's like when you do that type of work, is it better to get one contractor that's certified in all those things, or get people who are more like the electrician is a certified electrician, the plumbers? Is it better to get independent?
The pricing?
Contractors that are best at their particular capability?
So again, it depends upon the specifics. If you're just putting in a Japanese toilet, I would probably say piecemeal it yourself. If you're doing a full bathroom gut job and a full bathroom renovation, it would probably be more advisable to hire a contractor rather than piecemealing it together. And the reason is two things. One, a contractor will charge you a percentage on their quotes because that's their admin and their administration. So say an electrician charges them $5,000 and they put that in their quote, they're probably going to charge a 10% upcharge. So they're going to quote you $5,500 as what the electrician is. And that's their profit towards managing the trades. But when you hire a general contractor for larger projects, they are there to manage those trades for you. So they're there to sit there and to manage the project as a whole, from a construction side, not from a full project management, but to say, okay, this is what's going on. They're future looking at what's happening in the next 1 to 2 weeks, going, okay, I need my drywaller here on this day. I need my electrician to follow, and all these different things. They're managing those variables, ensuring that there isn't a lot of lag between when one person shows up to when another person is needed. So that's why I would recommend it on a big project. If you don't want to go this course because you don't want to pay the administrative costs from a general contractor managing subtrades, then that means that you are the construction manager as well as the project manager. So you are needing to look at the project, review it every single day to what has been done, what hasn't been done, have all those conversations with the subtrades in terms of how long they need on things, when are they going to get stuff done, what are they waiting on, and then managing that schedule and that timeline, and then scheduling people based upon that. And if anything goes awry, where say something is missed and they can't proceed and they can't come back for 2 weeks, you're then having to navigate that all on your own. And a lot of times it's more difficult than just having someone be able to do it for you.
Yeah, it seems like if you had like the overarching project being done by a contractor, because if you'd like, oh, okay, I'm going to go to Angie List, or I'm going to go to some website and find this plumber, and then you keep on, and it happens to be an electrician, and say, well, he can do everything. When maybe you should have gone to something that was a little bit more than professional, that had like that kind of project experience. Like maybe you should have done some research into figuring out, does this need to go to a general contractor that is known for doing this type of work?
Yes.
Or because you're trying to cut the cost, you just go on the net on your phone. So I'm just going to go and get this person. I think they can do it.
Oh yeah. And I mean, and that comes down to interviewing. You should always, always, always be interviewing multiple trades if you're going to go the trade route, or multiple contractors before you hire. And I do have a blog post on GabriellaMilgrom.co under the blog section that goes through the 9 critical questions you should be asking a trade or a general contractor before hiring. It goes into depth into all of them, because what really needs to be understood when you are hiring someone to work on your projects is that level of relationship, that level of communication. How long are they going to be on your project? So if you've got a construction manager or a site supervisor, what is their percentage on their project? Because if it's a small little bathroom, they're not there 100% of the time. And that's what leads to a lot of anger and confusion and miscommunication, as well as like judgment between the contractors and the clients of going, he didn't show up today, nothing's been done. Just because your site super wasn't on site doesn't mean that other things weren't done. He's coordinating the back end. He's not 100% dedicated to your project because your project is small. If you're just doing the bathroom, he's not going to be there 100% of the time. If you're doing a massive house new build or massive like extension to your home, he probably would be there 100% of the time. But for smaller projects, they're not. So you need to have those conversations and understand who that person is. What percentage are they dedicated to? What is their experience level? Have they done projects of similar size and scope and budget? What is their experience with these things? Get references and talk to those people and ask them all these questions, because you need to interview them before you make the decision, especially if you are doing a large project. It is a long-term relationship. That person's going to be with you for a while. You want to make sure that you're hiring the right person.
Yeah, because if you're adding like a room over your garage, or you're doing a full finished basement that has a lot of infrastructure changes, they're adding, you know, like to your HVAC and adding the plumbing and putting bathrooms, and it's a big project. So it's not some simple thing like a bathroom. And even your kitchen could be big. It's like you actually expand your house.
Yes, kitchens are a lot more complicated than people think they are.
Yeah, if you expand your house, or get, you know, knock a room out to make it bigger, or knock a bathroom out to do this and do that, then it's going to go a little bit bigger than what you thought. It's not just putting the refrigerator in and putting the stove in. It's something more than that.
Exactly. And I mean, I can't tell you when you say I'm going to hire trades versus hiring a contractor. I could technically, I'd say big projects always go with hiring a construction team. Don't piecemeal it together yourself. Unless you are someone who is retired, doesn't work, used to work in this industry, and is totally okay being the person who is managing all the multiple different pieces. Cool. Knock your socks off. But if you're someone who doesn't have experience and works full time, don't do it. You will give yourself a heart attack. It's not worth it. Just hire someone to do that for you. But if it's a smaller project and it's like replacing some electrical, adding some additional things in, switching out a toilet for a Japanese one that, you know, the lid lifts up and it talks to you when you walk in the bathroom, you could piecemeal that together with individual trades.
Yeah, that one you could probably get somebody from one of those website, you know, the phone apps for something like that. But like once you start getting into the bigger things, like your water pressure for your steam shower, or you kind of you want to get a sauna.
Well, you as a person wouldn't even know what to ask. Like, how do you even manage that? You don't know what you're looking for.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, do I have the right pressure to run this thing? Do I have to beef up my electric to be able to run this thing? To be able to, you know, have enough hot water, enough pressure to run it, you know, can they take the weight of it, you know, with all that, you know, the current tub was never going to be as big as this one.
Well, can the load be supported with the floor underneath? Yeah.
The floor that you got, because like that bathroom wasn't really designed to have that. So then you have to, this way you try to force something in without having somebody that knows what they're doing. And so that's where you kind of defer to, like, I don't know everything. And then maybe not try to force things just because you want it, but like try to do a little bit of research to actually know what is actually possible.
And I mean, to clarify, everything in the world of construction is possible. It's how much do you want to pay for it, and how long do you want the project to take? Because those are two very competing questions. If you want it right now and you don't want to pay the money to get it right now, then you're going to get a crappy quality. So you're not going to be getting the best output. Where if you are like, I will pay whatever it takes to be able to make this grand vision come to life, then yes, you have more opportunities available for you, and you could completely reinforce that entire structure and the floor and whatever needs to get done to make this beautiful steam bathroom spa-like creation come to life. But you need to know what's needed, and then also understand that if your existing structure can't support that, it's going to cost more and it's going to take longer.
Yeah, just because you want it doesn't mean you can make it. No, other than you, like you said, you could have something that's half hazard, not even anywhere knows cause damage and not even be what you want it to be. You got to be realistic with your, okay, you want it, then pay for it.
Which I know is a really like hard, like horrible or harsh way of saying it, but I mean it's true. Like in every project, it's a triangle. You've got time, you've got money, and you've got your scope, and then you've got quality in the inside. So it's like it's supposed to be equilateral, but a lot of the time what ends up happening is it kind of gets smushed, and then we're like, oh, we can still get exactly everything that we want. We've increased the scope, but we're not going to increase the time or the budget. Well, then you know what happens? Your quality gets squished. So it's always a give and take. It's just people don't really want to go through those nuances and understand that it is a give and take, and that is a process that happens in construction. I will also say that on bigger projects, that's not just replacing a toilet, for instance. One other really big benefit to having a construction manager and a project manager on your project that is experienced in the realm of construction is they know what inspections are needed. There are a lot of dodgy trades and a lot of dodgy contractors out there that may not get the inspections and the building permit sign-offs that are required at the different phases of a project. And if you don't know what those are, you can run into a situation from a liability as well as an insurance perspective where your renovation, your project does not meet those checkoff and those code compliance requirements, and they can push back and require you to open everything up and redo it. So that's again one where you want to hire the right team.
Plus, your insurance company or your homeowners might not pay if you didn't get inspected, signed off work, right? Is that what the risk that you're doing if in order to get it done cheaply and maybe not done right is that something goes wrong and then your insurance company says, well, was that actually qualified inspected work? Will they not?
And then they'll ask for the papers and you don't have them, and then they won't insure it.
And sometimes people don't even tell their insurance company that they actually did something, right? So if you have an insurance policy and you go add something to your house, but you never told your agent, your current coverage might not cover that, right?
There's a lot. I'm not an insurance expert, but there's a lot of nuances to insurance that homeowners doing any form of renovation do not understand. One of the biggest ones, aside from actually informing them that you've done something, is to inform them that you are doing it, because there is actual construction insurance that needs to be put on your property for the duration of that renovation timeframe, because your standard insurance does not cover you if something happens on your property in a construction time, like in a construction.
Oh, that's very important.
So like if someone gets injured or your water main breaks and it was related to a construction related incident, it is not covered under your standard insurance. And if you didn't get construction insurance, you're hooped.
Yeah, that's a real point. That's a good point, because a lot of people that maybe use the app-based contractor don't consider that and didn't probably call their agent, didn't understand the consequences of what they're doing. And so, I think that's a really core thing that you just mentioned there, because I think a lot of people, like, I happen to work in insurance IT. I'm not an agent, but I mean, I work with insurance companies, and I know the reason I asked that because I know what insurance companies do.
Oh yeah,
they don't want to pay the claim. So
no, exactly.
To not pay it because you didn't do ABC, and like you're putting yourself in a situation where you didn't do ABC, and now they're like, oh, I'm not paying.
Well, exactly. And I mean, it's not worth it. And when in doubt, just call them. I have a lot of projects where I'm working on it and I'm like, I don't know, is this going to trigger a building permit? I don't think it is based upon my expertise, but I'm just going to call. So I'll call the municipality. I'll say, this is what I'm doing. Do I need a building permit? And they go, no, 90% of the time. So then I know I've checked off that box. I'm not going to run into a situation. Same thing with insurance. If I'm ever in doubt on a project and the specifics, I will just call and say, this is what I'm doing. This is what's happening. Do I need insurance? What type and for how much coverage? Because you never want to end up in a situation where something happens and you thought you were covered, but you're not, and now you're on the hook.
Oh, yeah.
Or worse, you didn't even ask your contractor to get that insurance, because that also happens. And then they don't have the insurance that they need. And then you, as the homeowner, are now on the hook.
It's not just being bonded. You want them to be insured and bonded.
Yes,
right?
their liability, their insurance that they need, and the quantity of that is going to be based upon the actual construction cost budget, because it varies based upon a percentage. I also bases upon your project type. If you're doing a massive new build or remodel and you've got like construction grade equipment on your property, there's different insurance that's related to covering those assets that you need a contractor to have on top of the whole environmental ones. There's work safe and stuff for their employees. There's liability, there's bondage. There's all of these different types of insurance that you need to ask in that interview process, and that needs to be in the contract that you are stating that they need to have, and you need to be noted as a secondary on that insurance.
Mm. Well, I think this has been very, very informative.
On insurance.
No, this whole thing has been very, very informative, and I think it's a lot of people, that I talk to on the show do have their own home businesses. They are entrepreneurs, and in the podcast, I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and I think the things we've talked about apply to people in many different types of businesses, but because people are, and they might have a business, but they're taking that money from the business and they want to make changes to their house. They want to do something. They want to have that dream house. And
Yeah.
so this conversation was really useful, and I hope people go to your GabriellaMilgrom.co website. That is clickable when we are fully published. There you can go to the home to home challenge and to your main site directly from the link on Facebook once we're fully published in a couple of seconds. But thank you for being on the podcast tonight. I think what you said regarding making the right kind of design choices for your dreams is really cool. I think it's very helpful. I think a lot of people will find this useful and informative.
I really hope they do, and I had such an amazing time. And if any of this intrigued you and you're like, wow, I want to learn more, I want to know, how do I actually plan for all of this? That is the House to Home Challenge. It is launching the middle of October. It runs for 3 weeks. You get 3 weeks live with me where I teach you those fundamentals of how to take that idea in your head and put it into a fully realized thought process and plan. So come join me in the House to Home Challenge, and I'll give you all the nuggets inside my brain. But it's been an absolute pleasure. I had a total blast talking to you about all things homes and construction and visions and insurance, apparently.
Yeah. Well, eventually, like a lot of things we talked about, I have a bunch of plans. I want I want that kind of sauna. I want that the hydroponic garden, and I want my little studio or my finished basement. So there's a bunch of things I need to check out, and I'll be checking out a lot of what you're talking about in the future, because like as like not ready yet to do it, but when we pull the trigger, yeah, we'll definitely probably be checking you out. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Have a good night.
You too.